The story children know today about a humble boy, a golden ticket, and a whimsical chocolate factory is one of modern literature's greatest deceptions. What appears to be a tale of luck and virtue, crafted for innocent entertainment, conceals a far darker history. The story of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory reaches back thousands of years to a time when sweets were not treats, but symbols of power, scarcity, and social hierarchy. Long before candy factories existed, oral traditions warned of forbidden foods, of mysterious craftsmen who tested the poor, of indulgence intertwined with danger. These were not bedtime stories, they were lessons in survival, cautionary narratives encoded to preserve knowledge of hierarchy, resource control, and human cunning. The sanitized version known today owes much to Roald Dahl, whose 1964 book transformed a grim and morally ambiguous tale into a colourful morality play for children. Dahl presented Willy Wonka as eccentric and Charlie as virtuous, giving the story a veneer of innocence while obscuring its deeper meaning. Modern readers are invited to celebrate the boy's good fortune and the factory's wonders without recognizing the underlying critique of industrial power, child labor, and social inequality. Recent research by anthropologists and folklorists has revealed that motifs of magical sweets, dangerous indulgence, and cunning children appear in narratives from Europe to Africa to Asia, often associated with punishment, hierarchy, and survival. The chocolate factory is not just a place of delight. It is a symbol of wealth hoarded by the powerful, of desire controlled and tested, and of a social order that thrives on exploitation. Understanding this truth changes the story forever. The origins of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory stretch far beyond the 20th century, beyond the factories and sugar trade that most people assume define the story. Centuries before chocolate ever crossed the Atlantic, tales of forbidden foods, hidden treasures, and cunning children circulated in oral traditions across Europe and the Near East. These were not entertainment for idle minds. They were survival guides, narratives that encoded lessons about wealth, power, and the consequences of greed. Anthropologists tracing these motifs have found versions in Proto-Indo-European myths that predate modern civilization by thousands of years, stories passed down in villages where scarcity was a daily threat and cunning was the only path to survival. In these ancient tales, sweets and rare delicacies represented more than pleasure. They symbolized the hoarding of resources by the powerful, the wealth that common people could never reach except through ingenuity, audacity, or outright theft. The craftsmen or guardians of these treasures were often portrayed as capricious, cruel, or even cannibalistic, testing those who dared to approach their riches. Linguistic analysis shows that terms for sweetness, gold, and forbidden fruit appear across multiple ancient languages, suggesting a shared cultural memory of human exploitation and desire. The Charlie of these stories was not a virtuous child, but a desperate, clever figure navigating inequality and scarcity. His victories were not luck or divine favor, but skillful rebellion against the forces that controlled sustenance and survival. The factory itself, high and inaccessible, was a metaphorical tower of wealth, a symbol of industrial or divine power that ordinary people could approach only by cunning or courage. The seeds of Roald Dahl's narrative lay in these ancient allegories, disguised for children, but rooted in lessons about oppression, risk, and the audacity required to take what was denied. The Chocolate Factory is not merely a fantastical setting filled with rivers of cocoa and candy that defies physics. In the original narratives that inspired Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, it was a symbol of industrial power, of wealth and resources hoarded by those who controlled production, while the masses laboured in scarcity. Factories were the modern manifestation of a much older archetype, a towering, fortified domain where desire, labour, and reward were strictly controlled. Willy Wonka, the eccentric proprietor, is no harmless inventor. He is a figure of authority and surveillance, testing children, measuring their obedience, and punishing disobedience. Every machine, every confection, every seemingly playful trap carries meaning. These are mechanisms by which the elite maintain control, ensuring that only the clever, compliant, or fortunate may gain access to privilege. The story encodes a harsh social critique. The children who fall victim to Wonka's tests are not punished for moral failings alone. Their punishments mirror their class or character flaws, reflecting ancient anxieties about human weakness and the consequences of indulgence. They are allegories of societal hierarchy and labor discipline, warnings to the powerless that transgression can be fatal and reward uncertain. Charlie's survival, then, is not divine grace or luck. It is the outcome of cunning, observation, and audacity, qualities that allowed the poor and exploited to navigate the rigid structures of wealth and power. Viewed through this lens, Roald Dahl's version of the story sanitizes and disguises the industrial allegory. The whimsy conceals its darker roots, transforming a tale of exploitation, labor, and social stratification into a morality fable of obedience and reward. Beneath the colourful pages, the story remains a reflection of centuries-old truths. Wealth is concentrated, power is enforced, and only the clever or daring can survive. The boy known as Charlie in modern retellings is nothing like the wide-eyed, virtuous child familiar to most readers. In the original oral traditions, Charlie was a figure of desperation and cunning, a child born into scarcity who learned to navigate the cruel logic of wealth and power. He was clever, resourceful, and often morally ambiguous, a product of societies where survival required daring, subterfuge, and audacity. His victories were not gifts of luck, nor rewards for inherent goodness, but the result of observation, risk, and the willingness to challenge authority. Historical records, pamphlets, and early folk tales describe children like Charlie living in harsh conditions, where indulgence by the elite was matched by deprivation below. These narratives served as both warnings and manuals. They showed what could happen to those who transgressed, and what tools were necessary to seize opportunity when the powerful made themselves vulnerable. The golden ticket in this context is not a lottery. It is the representation of access to hoarded wealth, an artifact of the ruling class, achievable only by cunning and courage. Charlie's cleverness was celebrated not for morality, but for survival. In some variants, he outwitted guardians of food and resources who were cruel or capricious, facing hazards that mirrored the dangers of industrialization and aristocratic dominance centuries before factories existed. The story emphasized the disparity between the powerless and the elite, revealing the strategies necessary to navigate that imbalance. Roald Dahl's depiction, while charming, conceals this essential truth. Charlie's journey is a tale of calculated rebellion, of exploiting opportunity in a system designed to suppress the poor. The chocolate factory of early oral tradition was far from the whimsical palace of candy and delight familiar to modern readers. It was a place of danger, discipline, and grotesque spectacle, a crucible designed to test the cunning and courage of those who dared to approach it. Children entering these factories were not heroes in a moral fable, but survivors navigating a realm of strict control, scarcity, and punishment. Every machine, every contraption, every suite bore the imprint of power. Traps to expose weakness, rewards to test skill, and punishments that reflected ancient fears of indulgence gone awry. In some of the earliest recorded tales, confections themselves were deadly. Candies could burn, choke, or otherwise punish the unwary. Chocolate, sugar, and rare sweets were symbols of hoarded resources, accessible only to the elite or the clever few. The factory was a fortress, a monument to industrial and aristocratic dominance. The rulers of this domain were capricious, omnipotent figures whose pleasure or ire determined the fates of the powerless. The children's trials mirrored real-world dangers: scarcity, labor, disease, and exploitation. Success required audacity, observation, and cunning. Failure often meant ruin. The dangers were not merely physical. The factory represented a social hierarchy encoded in narrative form. Children who failed to control desire, demonstrate self-restraint, or navigate the complex rules of the domain were punished, symbolizing the consequences of transgression in a society structured to favor the wealthy. Roald Dahl's version softens these hazards into comedic misadventures, but the original stories preserved the harsh truth. Indulgence carried risk, and the powerful controlled every opportunity and every reward. The factory was never magical. It was a domain of power, a place where the disparity between wealth and scarcity was made literal and where cunning could become survival. Roald Dahl's 1964 version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory transformed a grim, morally ambiguous tale into a vibrant morality play for children. He took a story rooted in desperation, cunning, and industrial allegory and dressed it in whimsy, colour, and humour. The factory became a place of delight rather than danger. Willy Wonka, once a figure of surveillance, cruelty, and capricious power, became eccentric, charming, and oddly benevolent. Charlie, the cunning survivor of ancient and pre-industrial narratives, became virtuous, obedient, and morally exemplary. What had once been a tale of audacity and rebellion against entrenched power was now a story about innate goodness rewarded. Dahl's transformation did more than entertain. It masked centuries of social critique, replacing the harsh lessons of scarcity and survival with a moral hierarchy that comforted children rather than prepared them for reality. The golden ticket, once a symbol of audacity and the perilous path to hoarded wealth, was recast as a prize for virtue. The children who fell victim to the factory's hazards were no longer lessons in survival but comedic cautionary tales about greed and disobedience. The factory, previously a metaphor for the industrial fortress of the powerful, became a wonderland, separating pleasure from labour, danger from reward, and cunning from necessity. Even the Oompa Loompas, figures who originally symbolized exploited laborers, were transformed into playful musical assistants, removing the story's critique of hierarchical domination. Dahl's version concealed the bitter truth beneath layers of colorful narrative. The industrial allegory, the lessons of class struggle, the encoded warnings about greed, power, and survival remained hidden. Children were taught to admire the factory and its ruler rather than question the systems of wealth and control it represented. Every element of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory carries a meaning far deeper than children are told. The golden ticket, often presented as a prize of luck or virtue, is in truth a symbol of access to hoarded wealth, a representation of privilege controlled entirely by those who rule the factory. It is not granted freely. It is earned or discovered through cunning, daring, or desperation, the qualities necessary to navigate a world where resources are limited and power is concentrated. The Chocolate River, celebrated for its beauty and abundance, is a literal and metaphorical flow of wealth, controlled, channeled, and dangerous. Those who fail to respect it, who overindulge or underestimate its hazards, are punished, illustrating lessons about scarcity and discipline that were encoded in oral traditions long before sugar became commonplace. The Oompa Loompas, often seen as playful helpers, are in the original allegory representations of exploited labourers, forced to serve the whims of the powerful in exchange for sustenance and security. Their songs, light and whimsical in Dahl's telling, are echoes of older warnings about obedience, social roles, and the consequences of failing to navigate systems of control. Each child entering the factory embodies human traits observed and judged by those in power. Their fates are not mere morality lessons about greed or vanity. They reflect the structured hierarchies of society where missteps are punished and only the clever, observant, or daring may thrive. The factory itself, suspended in isolation, represents the concentration of wealth and privilege. Access is limited, surveillance is constant, and the consequences of failure are immediate. In this way, the story preserves a hidden critique of social order, inequality, and the mechanisms by which the powerful maintain dominance, disguising rebellion, punishment, and opportunity beneath a veneer of chocolate-scented whimsy. Beneath the candy-coated veneer of the story lies a message long obscured. The factory is not a playground, but a stage for rebellion against concentrated power. In the earliest versions, the child who navigates the factory does not passively accept authority. He observes, calculates, and exploits the vulnerabilities of the ruling figure. The golden ticket is not a gift, but a tool, a means to infiltrate a system designed to enforce scarcity and obedience. The chocolate river, the machines, and the Oompa Loompas are not whimsical obstacles. They are mechanisms of control, allegories for the structures of labor, surveillance, and wealth accumulation that dominate society. Mastery of these forces, even temporarily, represents an act of subversion. Charlie's journey is not about virtue, but survival and cunning. Each hazard encountered is a trial by which the child learns the weaknesses of the powerful. The dangers, originally portrayed as brutal or grotesque, are lessons in navigation, risk, and audacity. The factories of oral tradition were industrial fortresses, places where those who controlled production dictated who thrived and who failed. The story encodes strategies for recognizing leverage, exploiting opportunity, and claiming access to resources that are otherwise denied. The child who succeeds demonstrates not innocence, but intelligence and resilience. Even in sanitized versions, the allegorical skeleton remains. Charlie's triumph over the factory symbolizes the potential for the powerless to infiltrate, understand, and, if necessary, manipulate the systems of wealth and control. What appears as fantasy is, in truth, an ancient instruction manual. It teaches that access to hoarded resources is not guaranteed by obedience or luck, but by audacity, observation, and a willingness to challenge authority. The chocolate factory is a battlefield, and the clever survive.